the blistering heat of the Wild West, the dusty streets of Carson Creek were quiet, save for the occasional creak of a windmill or the distant bark of a stray dog. Among the humble wooden buildings, a small general store stood at the corner, its paint peeling and signs swinging precariously in the wind. Inside, a man named Luke Hollister, a rugged cowboy with sun-creased skin and a heart that often got him into trouble, counted out his earnings from a recent cattle drive. He wasn't wealthy, but he carried himself with the confidence of a man who had faced countless storms and survived. That morning, a commotion at the outskirts of town caught his attention. A young mother, barely more than a girl herself, was being harassed by a gang of thugs demanding money. Her children clinging desperately to her skirts, eyes wide with fear. Luke's hand instinctively went to his holster, though he hadn't drawn it in years. The mother, Maria, looked up at him with pleading eyes, her hair tangled and dirt-streaked, her small frame trembling as she tried to shield her 7 children from the danger. Something inside Luke stirred, a mixture of anger, empathy, and a stubborn sense of justice. Without hesitation, he strode into the scene, his spurs jingling and his presence commanding. "Leave them be," he barked, voice echoing over the dusty street. The thugs laughed at first, underestimating him, until Luke revealed the $300 he had, painstakingly saved from his recent job. In the world of Carson Creek, $300 was a fortune, enough to buy a small herd of cattle or a modest homestead. "This will cover your trouble," he said firmly, sliding the money across the dusty ground. The gang's leader, a burly man with a jagged scar across his cheek, hesitated, eyes flicking between the money and Luke. After a tense moment, he snatched the bills and gave a sneer, waving his men to follow. They vanished into the horizon, leaving behind a cloud of dust and stunned silence. Maria collapsed into Luke's arms, whispering her gratitude through tears, and he could feel the weight of her exhaustion and worry. It wasn't just about the money. It was about her children, her survival, and the courage it took to face each day with such unrelenting hardship. Luke felt something he hadn't in years, a spark of purpose beyond his own needs, a responsibility that wasn't born of law but of compassion. As they walked slowly toward the small cabin where Maria lived, the children clinging to their mother's skirts, Luke noticed the humble state of their home. It was nothing more than a weathered structure of timber and tin, smoke curling from a crooked chimney, the windows cracked and dusty. Yet in the eyes of Maria's children, he saw resilience, a stubborn spark that refused to be extinguished. He realized then that the $300 he had spent might seem like a gamble to some, but to these people it was a lifeline. And as the sun dipped below the jagged horizon, painting the sky in shades of crimson and gold, Luke felt an unfamiliar warmth, a sense that this moment, small and fleeting as it might seem, was the beginning of something far larger than himself. Maria looked at him, gratitude shining in her eyes, and whispered, "I don't know how to repay you, but I will find a way." Luke tipped his hat, offering a small smile, and said, "Just make sure you all stay safe." That's enough for me. Little did he know, the act of saving this mother and her children would set off a chain of events that would shock Carson Creek and the entire Wild West in ways he could never have imagined. And as Luke walked away, the wind carrying the dust of the town and the laughter of the children, a voice in the back of his mind reminded him that in the Wild West, every act of kindness came with consequences, and sometimes the most unexpected ones. Before we continue, make sure to hit that subscribe button because the story is about to take a turn you won't believe. And trust me, you won't want to miss a second of what happens next. The following morning, Carson Creek stirred to life under a pale, hazy sun, the dusty streets buzzing with the chatter of townsfolk and the clip-clop of horses on wooden planks. Luke Hollister rode back toward Maria's cabin, unable to shake the image of her weary eyes and the tiny hands of her children clutching hers so tightly. Even though he had spent $300, some that could have easily gone toward repairing his own worn boots or stocking up for the next cattle drive, he felt no regret. Something about that family had gripped his heart in a way nothing else had in years. As he approached the cabin, he noticed smoke curling from the chimney in a far steadier stream than the day before. Relief softened his tense shoulders. But then a shadow moved at the edge of the yard, and Luke's instincts immediately shifted. He slowed his horse, hand hovering near his holster. A man he didn't recognize emerged from behind the cabin, eyes sharp and calculating, and for a moment, Luke feared the thugs from yesterday had returned with a grudge. But this stranger was different, clean, well-dressed, and carrying a leather satchel that hinted at business rather than banditry. Maria stepped out onto the porch, her face lighting up as she noticed Luke, but then she stiffened, her eyes flicking nervously to the newcomer. "Luke, this is Mr. Hawthorne," she said quietly. "He says he has something important for you." Luke raised an eyebrow, curiosity piqued. The man tipped his hat politely, revealing a faint smile. "I understand you helped this family yesterday," he said, voice smooth but firm. "I've been sent to repay that debt and perhaps more." Luke's jaw tightened. He didn't expect repayment, especially not from a stranger, and his suspicion flared. Yet something about the man's calm demeanor suggested he wasn't here to threaten. Maria stepped closer, gripping her children's hands, her voice barely above a whisper. "Mr." Hawthorne opened his satchel, revealing a stack of papers, some coins, and a small leather-bound ledger. "This family has been surviving on the edge for too long," he explained. "There's an opportunity to change that, to secure a future that doesn't involve fear every day." Luke's brows knit. He was used to people promising change in the Wild West. Most of the time it led to disappointment, or worse, a fight. "And what do you want from me?" he asked, his voice steady, eyes scanning the man's face for any hint of deceit. Mr. Hawthorne's gaze didn't waver, only that you trust them as you trusted yesterday. "I've been watching, and I know the courage it takes to risk something for someone else. It's rare, but it deserves reward." Luke studied the ledger, and as he did, a wave of disbelief hit him. The ledger contained deeds, titles, and small notes of property and funds, more than he had ever seen amassed by one family in the Wild West. It was overwhelming, almost unreal. Maria stepped forward, her voice trembling with emotion. "Luke, he says we can finally rebuild. We can pay off debts, fix the cabin, and maybe even give the children a real home." Luke's fingers tightened around the reins of his horse. His heart swelled with pride and caution at the same time. He had helped her with money, yes, but he never imagined it would snowball into something so monumental. "I don't know what to say," he admitted, shaking his head, a faint smile tugging at his lips. "You've done enough already." Mr. Hawthorne shook his head. "No, Mr. Hollister, you've done enough to prove that some in this world still believe in doing the right thing. That belief has value, it inspires others. And today, it comes back to them, in a way no one could have predicted." Luke exhaled slowly, letting the weight of the situation sink in. He realized that his simple act of kindness, $300, to save a mother and her children, was no longer a mere gesture. It had become a catalyst for something far greater than himself. But before he could process it fully, Maria stepped closer, holding something small in her hands. "Luke, there's more," she said, her voice trembling but determined. "I wanted to wait, but I can't. I need you to see this." She handed him a folded piece of paper, and as Luke opened it, his eyes widened in shock. The contents revealed a plan, one that would forever change the fate of Carson Creek, the mother and her 7 children, and perhaps even Luke himself. His pulse raced as he realized that this was only the beginning, and that whatever came next would be unlike anything the Wild West had ever seen. And just like that, the ordinary day had transformed into something extraordinary, a story that would ripple through the town in whispers and awe. For everyone watching this story unfold, hit that subscribe button now, because what happens next is jaw-dropping, and you don't want to miss a single moment of this Wild West shocker. The sun had barely crested the jagged horizon of Carson Creek when Luke Hollister found himself pacing outside Maria's cabin, the folded paper still clutched in his hand. His mind raced, trying to process what he had just read. Plans for land, debts cleared, a future for 7 children that most could only dream of in the Wild West. He glanced at Maria, who stood on the porch, her face pale but resolute, the weight of responsibility etched into every line of her features. "I can't believe this," Luke said finally, voice low, almost to himself. "All of this? For you and the kids?" Maria shook her head, a faint smile trembling on her lips. "Not for me, Luke, for them. They deserve a life that isn't just about surviving." Her words struck him deeper than any gunfight or cattle stampede ever had. He had faced down desperados, survived blizzards and braved stampeding herds, but nothing had prepared him for the quiet, fierce strength of this woman standing before him. As Luke tried to make sense of it, a noise from the nearby barn caught his attention. A horse neighed sharply, and he instinctively reached for his gun, only to see the children running toward him, laughing. chasing one another with unbridled joy for the first time in his memory. Relief and awe mingled in his chest. But before he could speak, Maria called him back to the porch. "There's more," she said, her voice barely audible over the wind. She led him inside, where the interior of the cabin seemed transformed. Not by wealth, but by intention. Every corner meticulously organized. A small fire warming the room, and on the table, another letter addressed to Luke in spidery handwriting. "This is from Mr. Hawthorne," Maria explained. "He says there's someone in town who's been watching. Someone who can help guide you through what's coming next." Luke unfolded the letter with a sense of dread and anticipation. It spoke of challenges. Rival ranchers who would not take kindly to a new family gaining sudden wealth. Threats that could escalate into violence. And the need for alliances in a world where the strong often preyed on the weak. Luke's jaw tightened. He had acted out of simple humanity, giving $300 to protect a mother and her children. Now it seemed the act had cast him into a storm he had not bargained for. A web of stakes far higher than mere money. Maria placed a gentle hand on his arm. "Luke, I know this is overwhelming, but you saved us, and now maybe we can save you too. Not from danger, but from the isolation you carry. You've always fought alone. Maybe it's time to let someone in." Luke felt a lump rise in his throat. He had wandered the West for years, guarding his heart and his conscience, trusting few, relying on only himself. Yet here was a woman who had faced unspeakable hardship and still extended trust. Still reached out with gratitude and something deeper, a silent bond forged in shared survival. Before he could respond, a loud banging came from the front door. Luke's hand went to his holster instinctively. He opened the door to find a messenger, horse sweat dripping from his brow, holding a sealed envelope marked with a symbol Luke recognized, a brand belonging to the Hawthorne family. Luke broke the seal and read the message. It detailed a sudden turn. A nearby landowner, known for ruthless tactics, had caught wind of Maria's newfound security. Threats had been made against her family and the land, and the messenger was instructed to guide Luke to a secret location where plans could be laid to protect them all. Luke's heart pounded. The Wild West was no stranger to violence, but now, his act of kindness had become a lightning rod, drawing danger toward the family he had just saved. Maria watched him silently, fear and resolve mingling in her gaze. Then slowly she did something Luke could not have anticipated. She placed her hands over his, steadying them, and said, "Luke, you saved us yesterday. Today I'm going to save you. You won't face this alone." For the first time, Luke felt the tremor of shock, not from danger, but from the courage radiating from this woman. She had been through more than anyone should endure, yet she had the audacity to step forward and declare that he was not alone, that he too could be part of something bigger than himself. As the children watched from the corner, wide-eyed, Luke realized that his $300 had ignited more than survival. It had sparked loyalty, bravery, and an alliance he never saw coming. And as the wind whipped through Carson Creek, carrying the dust of the town and the tension of what was to come, Luke knew one thing. The Wild West was about to witness a twist that would shock everyone who thought they understood its rules. And to all of you following this story, hit that subscribe button now. Because what happens next is beyond anything you've imagined, and the Wild West is about to be turned upside down in ways that will leave you speechless. The sun had barely risen over Carson Creek, painting the wooden rooftops in streaks of gold and orange. But Luke Hollister felt no warmth. His mind was a storm, a whirlwind of possibilities and threats ever since the letter from the Hawthorne messenger had arrived. Maria stood beside him in the cabin, her hands clenched tightly in determination. Her 7 children huddled quietly behind her, sensing the tension yet too young to understand the storm brewing around them. "Luke," she said softly, yet with steel in her voice, "we can't just wait for danger to find us. If they want to take what we've earned, we have to act first." Luke looked at her astonished. He had expected gratitude, humility, and maybe tears, but not this, a bold plan, cunning and daring, emanating from a woman who had been beaten down by life, yet refused to stay defeated. "What are you thinking?" he asked cautiously, already sensing that whatever she had in mind would test not only courage, but every ounce of nerve they possessed. Maria pulled a small weathered map from beneath the table, spreading it out with precision. She had marked the routes of the rival landowners' men, notes scribbled in the margins, and a path leading to the center of town, where a wagon depot would allow them to control supplies and gather allies. Luke's eyebrows rose. This is brilliant," he admitted. but dangerous. If they catch you, if they catch us, there's no telling what they'll do. Maria met his gaze evenly. That's why I need you. I can't do this alone. I've protected my children this long by staying careful. But now we have to be bold. I won't let them take our home, our future, or your life, Luke. You saved us once. Let me save you now in return. Her words struck him, resonating deep in a place he rarely acknowledged, his heart. The plan she had devised wasn't just defensive. It was audacious, strategic, and utterly unthinkable. She intended to confront the rival landowner's men head-on, using the children's safety as leverage to force them into backing down. It was reckless, yes, but it was genius in its simplicity and emotional power. Luke swallowed hard, knowing she was risking everything. Yet, seeing her resolve, he knew he had no choice but to support her. Together, they gathered the children and prepared to execute the plan. Every step was calculated, every detail rehearsed in whispers, every possible outcome imagined. By midday, Maria had positioned herself in the town square, holding the youngest child in her arms while the others flanked her, standing tall despite their age. Luke watched from the shadows, heart-pounding as rival men approached, bristling with menace and disbelief. They had expected fear, weakness, and submission. Instead, they found courage and defiance. An unyielding mother, willing to risk everything to protect her family. Maria spoke, her voice carrying across the square with calm authority. This family will not be intimidated, she declared. You may think you have power over us, but the only thing we fear is losing each other. Turn away, and you keep your lives. Persist, and everyone loses. Choose wisely. For a moment, the men laughed, mocking the sight of a single woman with children standing in defiance. But as the words sank in, and as the unwavering gaze of the children met theirs, something unexpected happened. The leader hesitated, then glanced at his men, who were suddenly unsure. The courage and unity of Maria's family, coupled with Luke's presence ready to intervene, created a force more formidable than any gun or threat. Slowly the gang backed off, muttering under their breath, before disappearing into the dusty streets of Carson Creek, leaving stunned onlookers whispering in awe. Luke stepped forward, feeling a mix of relief and pride, as Maria lowered the youngest child into the arms of an older sibling. She turned to him, sweat and dust streaking her face, but eyes shining with triumph. We did it, she said simply. Luke couldn't help the grin that spread across his weathered face. You did it, he corrected, admiration and disbelief mingling in his voice. I didn't think anyone could stand up to them like that. Maria's smile was faint, but it carried the weight of victory. Sometimes courage isn't about size or strength. It's about heart, and protecting those who depend on you. You taught me that yesterday, Luke. Now you see it in action. As the sun dipped lower, casting long shadows across the town, Luke realized the truth. The $300 he had given to save this mother and her children had ignited a chain reaction, far beyond his imagination. It had sparked bravery, unity, and the most shocking act of defiance the town had ever witnessed. Carson Creek would talk about it for years to come, about the mother who stood fearless in the face of danger, about the cowboy who believed in her when no one else would, and about the bond forged that could not be broken. And to everyone following this story, remember to subscribe, because the final chapter will reveal the outcome that stunned the entire Wild West and the surprising twist that even Luke couldn't have predicted. The sun had begun its descent over Carson Creek, casting a fiery glow across the rugged landscape. As Luke Hollister and Maria stood in the aftermath of what had become the most talked-about day in the town's history, word had spread quickly. A mother of 7, cornered and threatened, had faced down the most notorious gang in the region, and a humble cowboy had been at her side. Luke couldn't help but feel a swell of pride, not for himself, but for Maria, whose courage and intelligence had turned what could have been tragedy into triumph. Yet even as the dust settled and the town breathed a collective sigh of relief, another twist awaited. A rider appeared on the horizon, galloping fast, kicking up clouds of dust. Luke tensed, instinctively moving in front of the children. But Maria's hand on his arm stopped him. Let's see who it is, she said, a knowing glint in her eye. The rider slowed and approached, revealing a familiar face, the well-dressed Mr. Hawthorne. He dismounted with grace, his usual calm expression now edged with urgency. Luke, Maria, he began, voice steady but serious. What you've done today has changed everything. But there's one final matter we need to address. The family you saved, your bravery, has caught the attention of the Territorial Council. They want to officially recognize your actions and grant you a reward beyond anything you've imagined. Luke blinked, disbelief heavy in his chest. A reward? He repeated. He had never sought wealth or fame. Saving Maria and her children had been instinct, pure and simple. Yet here was confirmation that his simple act had rippled, far beyond his expectations. Mr. Hawthorne reached into his satchel and pulled out a deed, stamped and signed, granting Luke and Maria a piece of land on the outskirts of town, fertile and safe, enough to secure a future for the family and even provide them independence from the unpredictable dangers of the West. Maria gasped softly, her hands trembling. "Luke, all of this?" she whispered. Luke shook his head, voice hoarse with emotion. "It's not about the land," he said. "It's about what we did together. You faced down impossible odds, Maria. I just helped." But Maria's eyes shone with gratitude and something more, a bond forged in fire, courage and unwavering trust. She stepped closer, her children peeking from behind her skirts, wide-eyed and amazed at the attention and recognition their mother had earned. "Luke," she said softly, "you didn't just save us with money. You saved us with heart, and now we can give back in ways that will last generations. That's the real reward." Just as Luke absorbed her words, the townsfolk began emerging from the shadows of their homes, clapping, cheering, and offering congratulations. The story had spread like wildfire. A mother of 7 had stood her ground against danger, and the cowboy who believed in her had changed lives forever. For Luke, the moment was surreal. The dusty streets of Carson Creek, once quiet and foreboding, now thrummed with admiration, respect, and a renewed sense of community. Yet the final shock was still to come. Maria, turning toward Luke with a mischievous sparkle in her eye, reached into her pocket and pulled out something small, wrapped carefully in cloth. Luke raised an eyebrow. "What's that?" he asked. Maria smiled, a mix of pride and affection. "It's my way of showing you that bravery, kindness, and courage are always noticed. That sometimes the person who saves others ends up being saved in return." She handed him the small package, and with hands that trembled slightly, Luke unwrapped it. Inside was a handcrafted badge, engraved with words he would never forget. "Protector of the innocent, hero of Carson Creek." Luke's eyes widened in astonishment. He felt a lump rise in his throat as he looked at Maria and her children, the townsfolk still cheering in the background. He realized then that the $300 he had spent, a seemingly small sum, had sparked a series of events that reshaped lives, created unbreakable bonds, and left an indelible mark on the Wild West. And as the sun dipped below the horizon, casting long shadows across the land they now called their own, Luke knew that this was more than victory, it was legacy. The mother of 7 had not just survived. She had inspired courage, forged alliances, and forever changed the fate of her family and the man who had believed in her. And to everyone following this story, remember this: even the smallest act of kindness can spark unimaginable change, and the Wild West is full of heroes waiting to rise. Hit that subscribe button now, because stories like this, of bravery, courage, and shocking twists, are just the beginning, and you won't want to miss what comes next.